Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to perform this classification task using open source LLM. In the previous video, we used the OpenAI's endpoint to perform classification, but there are instances where we are handling a protected data and which we cannot expose it out of our cloud network. In such cases, we can use open source models as an alternative. In case of OpenAI, the model was already available as an endpoint, so all we had to do was to take our data and add some prompt and send it to the endpoint and get the result. But in case of open source models, the models are available as a weights in Hugging Face or other repositories. So it's our responsibility to take those weights and serve the model. To do that, we are going to use the tool Text Generation Inference (TGI), which is going to take our model and convert it as an endpoint. We are going to use the Mistral 7 billion open source model for classification. Let's get started. To run this example with open source models, we need to make sure we have a GPU machine. I am going to use AWS G5.xlarge instance, which costs around $1 per hour, and it is a single GPU machine with 24 GB of VRAM. When spinning up the instance, there are three things that we need to keep in mind. Number one, we need to launch this machine with a deep learning AMI so that the PyTorch and other relevant packages are pre-installed. Number two, make sure you have sufficient disk space available in the virtual machine, because we are going to download the weights from Hugging Face. And number three, we have to whitelist the IP address for two ports. One is 22, other one is 8080. The port 22 we are going to use for doing an SSH, and port 8080 we are going to use it for inference. In case of API based models, the endpoints are already available and the charges are only based on the number of inputs and the number of output tokens that are getting generated. But in open source models, it's not the case. The charges are only based on the infrastructure that we are using. For instance, for running this example, I am using AWS 5.xlarge, which costs $1 per hour, and there is no extra charges based on number of tokens, number of input tokens or output tokens. So to convert your open source model, so for instance, in this example, we are going to use Mistral 7 billion model. The Mistral 7 billion model is available in Hugging Face, and to host this model in the AWS instance, we are going to make use of the library Text Generation Inference by Hugging Face. TGI is one of the fastest way of serving your model. By issuing simple commands, you can load this model as an API endpoint. Let's try that in AWS instance. First, we need to set the model parameter. Let's go to PuTTY. Make sure you SSH into your system. Okay, you do model equals, and here we have to provide the Hugging Face URI of the model that we are trying to serve. So for instance, I am going to use Mistral 7 billion model version 2. So I am going to copy this URI and paste it in the terminal. Now the model parameter is set. Let's go back. The second parameter that we have to set is volume. So here we are setting the volume to the folder data. Let's paste it and let me do ls of data. As we can see, I have already downloaded the Mistral 7 billion model. When you launch this Docker command, basically it downloads the Mistral 7 billion model, and only for the first time. When you launch the same Docker command again, it picks this 7 billion model from cache. Let's go ahead and do the Docker command. I'll copy the Docker command and paste it in the PuTTY. So here we can see we are running in the -- model ID. I'm passing $model, which is nothing but our Mistral 7 billion model, and we can see it has already said files are already present on the host, skipping download. If we are running this for the first time, since we are running TGI's Docker image, the Docker image Text Generation Inference 1.4 will be downloaded, and it will be around 4 GB, and since you are running it for the first time, the model Mistral 7 billion will be downloaded to the data folder. But on the subsequent steps, it gets picked up from the cache, and we can see it skipped the download, and here it's trying to load the model, and the model has been loaded, and we can see that it is defaulting to 0.0.0.0. That means we can use the public IP of the AWS instance and then use this model as for the inference. Let's do a sample request to understand how it is. Let's quickly write a Python script and see how we can perform inference with TGI. So to do that, I'm going to use the request module. Let me import JSON. Okay, so we are going to use, basically we are going to do the request dot post. I'll reserve the parameters. So first parameter will be the endpoint. So the endpoint will be http:// and we have to provide the IP address of the machine, okay, :8080/generate. So make sure the port 8080 is whitelisted for your IP. So the next step is to define the headers. So in this case we are going to use application JSON. So my content type will be application/JSON. Let's run this. Endpoint is set, headers are set. The next step is to write our prompt. Say my prompt now is tell me a joke. To send this prompt, we need to convert this as a dictionary. So my payload will be inputs : prompt. So I am just converting this as a dictionary, and for when I do requested post, my URL parameter will be the endpoint, and let's pass the headers, and the last parameter is data because we are doing requested post, and it will be json.dumps of payload. We are converting json.dumps of payload will convert the dictionary into a JSON. So here it is a valid JSON. Let's save this in the response variable. So the response.status code, okay, it's 200. Let's print the response.text. We can see this is the response from TGI. So here we are, our endpoint is IP address : 8080, which is nothing but the TGI server which is running in EC2. We can also see the request coming in from there, and the request was a success. When we performed the classification with OpenAI, we used the langchain framework, and I was talking about using advantages of langchain when we are changing across different models. So this is a classic example. Let's quickly go through the code which we have written for the previous example. So we are loading the data set here, and we are picking the first 1000 rows, and here we are just splitting and ignoring all the other paragraphs. We are just going to pick the first paragraph. This is a sample article, and we have set 20 categories. Here we have 20 categories. Once this is done, we are going to fetch the OpenAI key from the user using getPass, and we are going to set it in the environment variable. So we can comment these steps, but because we are not going to use OpenAI now, we are going to use the Mistral 7 billion model using TGI. Since we are going to use TGI, we have to provide the Hugging Face hub token. You can find this token in Hugging Face settings, access tokens. Copy the token and paste it here, and make sure this variable is loaded. Once the variable is loaded, we can set that to an environment variable Hugging Face API token. And all we have to do is to use, instead of having LLM is equal to OpenAI, we have to provide an endpoint string. There is a small change between the implementation of request module and here. When we are doing request.post, you need to provide your endpoint URL as http:// IP address : 8080/generate. But in case of if langchain, it is sufficient to provide only the IP and the port. So here we are going to give http:// IP : 8080. So make sure 8080 is whitelisted for your IP address, so that when you are sending the request, it reaches the server. So we are going to use langchain LLMs import Hugging Face endpoint, and we are going to set our Hugging Face endpoint URL as this. Right now you can, once you run this, you will see the login is successful, and once the login is successful, we no longer need this code. We are not going to use OpenAI, and we are going to do llm.invoke of tell me a joke. Now this llm.invoke of tell me a joke will send this request to our TGI server. TGI server will send the request to Mistral 7 billion model. It will instruct the model with this prompt, and it will fetch the response and send it back. So here we can see the response for tell me a joke. Now we can use the same notebook with very little change. The only change that we are doing is the LLM endpoint. Instead of using LLM as OpenAI, we can use the langchain's library. We can load the Hugging Face endpoint from langchain community.llms, and rest of the code is same. We don't have to change any of this code. Okay, let's go ahead and run the rest of the code. So here we are setting the prompt. So based on the following article, identify the category, and we are passing in the article and the category, and let's do llm.invoke. We can see the article is classified as arts. Let's print the article. Okay, good. And for this demo, I'll run this loop for only for 10, but I'll save up all the results and have it as a separate JSON file in the Git, which you can access from the link in the description. So let's go ahead and run this for 10 iteration. Now for the first 10 articles, it's performing the classification. Yes, it's done. So let's print the answers. Okay, here you can see the answers, and we can also load this as a data frame, and let's print the first data frame. Okay, anarchism, and okay, mathematics, and of course it's a language, and Alabama is classified as geography, right? Let's run this for 20 now and see how consistent the results are. And we can also see, let's run it for 20. Let's wait for it to finish. Okay, now we have done it for 20. Let's run the answers again. Here we can see, even though we have forced the model to provide only one classification output, there are some instances where the model provides extra outputs, say for example science, specifically physics, and there are instances where model picks multiple classes as the answers, and there are instances when you run it for 1000 or 10,000 iterations, you will see that model is providing explanations for some of these inputs. In the forthcoming videos, we are going to discuss about how we can effectively tune this prompt to force the model to output only one particular classification output. As we can see, deploying using TGI is very simple. All we had to do was to set up right machine and provide relevant Docker commands. When we run it for 100 iterations, we can see it took only 70 seconds to classify these 100 articles. And we can see there is, in case of using Mistral 7 billion, there are some outputs where model is not forcing to return only one classification output. As we can see here, model returned environment, but it was trying to explain why it has been tagged to environment. And we are going to work on such prompt tuning. We're going to see a couple of videos about benchmarking the text generation inference, latency, throughput, and other items, and we're going to see how we can deploy it in other servers as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.